This book I got from a thrift shop. 100 hair-raising little horror stories. On the front, there's a haunted house back here with the backdrop of the moon. And this looks like a vampire coming out of a trunk, maybe. There's a mausoleum with some headstones nearby, and a very terrified looking person here. So let's see. The Adventure of My Grandfather by Washington Irving. The Adventure of My Aunt by Washington Irving. The Adventure of the German Student by Washington Irving. Aunt by Chad Williamson. The Assembly of the Dead by Chad Williamson. At the Bureau by Steve Resnick Tem. Babylon 70M by Donald A. Wollheim. Berenice by Edgar Allan Poe. Beyond the Wall by Ambrosia Bierce. The Boarded Window by Ambrosia Bierce. Boxes by Al Sorrentino. The Candidate by Henry Slessor. Cemetery Dance by Richard T. Shizmar. The Certificate by Avram Davidson. Cheapskate by Gary Razor. The China Bowl by E. F. Benson. The Cobweb by Saki. Come to the Party by Francis Garfield. A Curious Dream by Mark Twain. Dark Wings by Phyllis Eisenstein. Dead Call by William F. Nolan. Different Kinds of Dead by Ed Gorman. Displaced Person by Eric Frank Russell. The Disintegration of Alan by Melissa Mia Hall. Down by the Sea Near the Great Big Rock by Joe R. Lansdale. Dragon Sunday by Ruth Berman. Duck Hunt by Joe R. Lansdale. The Dust by Al Sorrentino. The Evil Clergyman by H.P. Lovecraft. Examination Day by Henry Slessor. The Faceless Thing by Edward D. Hoke. The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar by Edgar Allan Poe. Feeding Time by James Gunn. Feeding Time by Robert Sheckley. The Final Quest by William F. Nolan. Fish Night by Joe R. Lansdale. The Four-Fingered Hand by Barry Payne. A Ghost Story by Mark Twain. Give Her Hell by Donald A. Wollheim. The Giveaway by Steve Resnick Tem. The Glove by Fritz Leiber. The Grab by Richard Lehman. The Haunted Mill or the Ruined Home by Jerome K. Jerome. He Kilted with a Stick by William F. Nolan. Heading Home by Ramsey Campbell. The Hollow of the Three Hills by Nathaniel Hawthorne. The Hollow Man by Norman Partridge. Holly Don't Tell by Jolene Bredingham. The Hound by H.P. Lovecraft. The Hour and the Man by Robert Barr. The House at Evening by Francis Garfield. The Idea by Barry N. Malzberg. Identity Crisis by Thomas F. Monteleone. In the Corn by Robert Fox. An Incident on Route 12 by James H. Schmidt. Interview by Frank A. Chivor. The Jam by Henry Slessor. The Kirk Spook by E.G. Swain. Making Friends by Gary Razor. The Marble Hands by Bernard Capes. Mariana by Fritz Leiber. Mask by Ed Gorman. The Middle Toe of the Right Foot by Ambrosia Bierce. Moving Night by Nancy Holder. Naples by Avram Davidson. Night Visions by Jack Dan. Night Deposits by Chet Williamson. Night Shapes by Barry M. Malzberg. Number 1 Branch Line, The Signalman by Charles Dickens. The Old Black Hat by Gary Razor. Out of the Storm by William Hope Hodgson. Out of Africa by David Drake. The Oval Portrait by Edgar Allan Poe. Party Time by Mort Castle. The Passenger by E.F. Benson. Peekaboo by Bill Bronzini. The Pitch by Dennis Hutchinson. The Poor by Steve Resnick-Tem. The Rag Thing by Donald A. Wollheim. Rendezvous by Danielle Ransom. The Same Old Grind by Bill Bronzini. The Skeleton by Jerome K. Jerome. Something There Is by Charles L. Grant. Spring-Fingered Jack by Susan Casper. Sredni Veshtar by Saki. The Statement of Randolph Carter by H.P. Lovecraft. The Story of Mohammed Din by Rudyard Kipling. The Thing in the Forest by Bernard Capes. Threshold by Sharon Webb. Today's Special by Dennis Hutchinson. Topsy by F. Paul Wilson. Toy by Bill Bronzini. Transfer by Barry N. Malzberg. Treats by Norman Partridge. Under My Bed by Al Sarantonio. Up Under the Roof by Manly Wade Wellman. The Upturned Face by Stephen Crane. We Have Always Lived in the Forest by Nancy Holder. Where Did She Wander by Manly Wade Wellman. And Witness by Avram Davidson. So those are the 100 stories that are included in this book, along with their subsequent page number. Which one should I read? Let me just open the book to a random page, and whatever that is Alright, the only title on this page is The Skeleton by Jerome K. Jerome. And this one is not that long, so we might read another one after. One evening, Jeffson asked me if I believed in spiritualism to its fullest extent. That is rather a large question, I answered. What do you mean by spiritualism to its fullest extent? Well, do you believe that the spirits of the dead have not only the power of revisiting this earth at their will, but that, when here, they have the power of action, or rather, of exciting to action? Let me put a definite case. A spiritualist friend of mine, a sensible and by no means imaginative man, once told me that a table, through the medium of which the spirit of a friend had been in the habit slowly across the room towards him of its own accord one night as he sat alone and pinioned him against the wall. Now, can any of you believe that, or can't you? I could, Brown took it upon himself to reply, but before doing so I should wish for an introduction to the friend who told you the story. Speaking generally, he continued, it seems to me that the difference between what we call the natural and the supernatural is merely the difference between frequency and rarity of occurrence. Having regard to the phenomena we are compelled to admit, I think it illogical to disbelieve anything we are unable to disprove. For my part, remarked McShaughnessy, I can believe in the ability of our spirit friends to give the quaint entertainments credited to them much easier than I can give their desire to do so. You mean, added Jephson, that you cannot understand why a spirit, not compelled as we are by the exigencies of society, should care to spend its evenings on a labored and childish conversation with a room full of abnormally uninteresting people. That is precisely what I cannot understand, McShaughnessy agreed. Nor I either, said Jephson, but I was thinking of something very different altogether. Suppose a man died with the dearest wish of his heart unfulfilled. Do you believe that his spirit might have power to return to earth and complete the interrupted work? Well, answered McShaughnessy, if one admits the possibility of spirits retaining any interest in the affairs of this world at all, it is certainly more reasonable to imagine them engaged upon a task such as you suggest than to believe that they occupy themselves with the performance of mere drawing-room tricks. But what are you leading up to? Why, to this, replied Jephson, seating himself straddle-legged across his chair and leaning his arms upon the back. I was told a story this morning at the hospital by an old French doctor. The actual facts are few and simple. All that is known can be read in the Paris police records of 62 years ago. The most important part of the case, however, is the part that is not known, and that never will be known. The story begins with a great wrong done by one man unto another man. What the wrong was, I do not know. I am inclined to think, however, it was connected with the woman. I think that, because he who had been wronged hated him who had wronged him, with a hate such as does not often burn in a man's brain, unless it be fanned by the memory of a woman's breath. Still, that is only conjecture, and the point is immaterial. The man who had done the wrong fled, and the other man followed him. It became a point-to-point race, the first man having the advantage of a day's start. The course was the whole world, and the stakes were the first man's life. Travelers were few and far between in those days, and this made the trail easy to follow. The first man, never knowing how far or how near the other was behind him, and hoping now and again that he might have baffled him, would rest for a while. The second man, knowing always just how far the first one was before him, never paused, and thus each day the man who was spurred by hate drew nearer to the man who was spurred by fear. At this town, the answer to the never-varied question would be, at 7 o'clock last evening, Monsieur. 7, 18 hours. Give me something to eat, quick, while the horses are being put to. At the next, the calculation would be 16 hours. Passing a lonely chalet, Monsieur put his head out of the window. How long since a carriage passed this way with a tall, fair man inside? Such a one passed early this morning, Monsieur. thanks, drive on 100 francs apiece if you are through the pass before daybreak. And what for dead horses, monsieur? Twice their value when living. One day the man who was ridden by fear looked up and saw before him the open door of a cathedral, and passing in, knelt down and prayed. He prayed long and fervently for men when they are in sore straits, clutch eagerly at the straws of faith. He prayed that he might be forgiven his sin, and, more important still, that he might be pardoned the consequences of his sin and be delivered from his adversary. And a few chairs from him, facing him, knelt his enemy, praying also. But the second man's prayer, being a thanksgiving merely, was short, so that when the first man raised his eyes, he saw the face of his enemy gazing at him across the chair tops with a mocking smile upon it. He made no attempt to rise, but remained kneeling, fascinated by the look of joy that shone out of the other man's eyes. And the other man moved the high-backed chair one by one, and came toward him softly. Then, just as the man who had been wronged stood beside the man who had wronged him, full of gladness that his opportunity had come, there burst from the cathedral tower a sudden clash of bells, and the man whose opportunity had come broke his heart and fell back dead, with that mocking smile still playing round his mouth. And so he lay there. Then the man who had done the wrong rose up and passed out, praising God. What became of the body of the other man is not known. It was the body of a stranger who had died suddenly in the cathedral. There was none to identify it, none to claim it. Years passed away, and the survivor in the tragedy became a worthy and useful citizen and a noted man of science. In his laboratory were many objects necessary to him in his researches, and, prominent among them, stood a certain corner a human skeleton. It was very old and much mended skeleton, and one day the long-expected end arrived, and it tumbled to pieces. Thus it became necessary to purchase another. The man of science visited a dealer he well knew, a little parchment-faced old man who kept a dingy shop where nothing was ever sold, within the shadow of the towers of Notre Dame. The little parchment-faced old man had just the very thing that Monsieur wanted, a singularly fine and well-proportioned study. It should be sent round and set up in Monsieur's laboratory that very afternoon. The dealer was as good as his word. When Monsieur entered his laboratory that evening, the thing was in its place. Monsieur seated himself in his high-backed chair and tried to collect his thoughts, but Monsieur's thoughts were unruly and inclined to wander, and to wander always in one direction. Monsieur opened a large volume and commenced to read. He read of a man who had wronged another and fled from him, the other man following. Finding himself reading this, he closed the book angrily, and went and stood by the window and looked out. He saw before him the sun-pierced nave of a great cathedral, and on the stones lay a dead man with a mocking smile upon his face. Cursing himself for a fool, he turned away with a laugh. But his laugh was short-lived, for it seemed to him that something else in the room was laughing also. Struck suddenly still, with his feet glued to the ground, he stood listening for a while, then sought with starting eyes to the corner from where the sound had seemed to come. But the white thing standing there was only grinning. Monsieur wiped the damp sweat from his head and hands and stole out. For a couple of days he did not enter the room again. On the third, telling himself that his fears were those of a hysterical girl, he opened the door and went in. To shame himself, he took his lamp in his hand, and crossing over to the far corner where the skeleton stood, examined it. A set of bones, bought for 300 francs, Was he a child to be scared by such a bogey? He held his lamp up by the front of the thing's grinning head. The flame of the lamp flickered as though a faint breath had passed over it. The man explained this to himself by saying that the walls of the house were old and cracked, and that the wind might creep in anywhere. He repeated this explanation to himself as he recrossed the room, walking backwards, with his eyes fixed on the thing. When he reached his desk, he sat down and gripped the arms of his chair till his fingers turned white. He tried to work, but the empty sockets in that grinning head seemed to be drawing him towards them. He rose and battled with his inclination to fly screaming from the room. Glancing fearfully about him, his eye fell upon a high screen standing before the door. He dragged it forward and placed it between himself and the thing so that he could not see it, nor it see him. Then he sat down again to his work. For a while he forced himself to look at the book in front of him, but at last, unable to control himself any longer, he suffered his eyes to follow their own bent. It may have been an hallucination. He may have accidentally placed the screen so as to favor such an illusion, but what he saw was a bony hand coming round the corner of the screen, and, with a cry, he fell to the floor in a swoon. The people of the house came running in and lifted him up, carried him out, and laid him upon his bed. As soon as he recovered, his first question was, where had they found the thing? Where was it when they entered the room? When they told him they had seen it standing where it always stood, he had gone down into the room to look again, because of his frenzied entreaties, and returned trying to hide their smiles. He listened to their talk about overwork and the necessity for change and rest, and said they might do with him as they would. For so many months the laboratory door remained locked. Then there came a chill autumn evening when the man of science opened it again and closed it behind him. He lighted his lamp and gathered his instruments and books around him, and sat down before them in his high-backed chair, and the old terror returned to him. But this time he meant to conquer himself. His nerves were stronger now and his brain clearer. He would fight his unreasoning fear. He crossed to the door and locked himself in, and flung the key to the other end of the room, where it fell among jars and bottles with an echoing clatter. Later on, his old housekeeper, going her final round, tapped at his door and wished him good night, as was her custom. She received no response at first, and, growing nervous, tapped louder and called again, and at length an answering good night came back to her. She thought little about it at the time, but afterwards she remembered that the voice that had replied to her had been strangely grating and mechanical. Trying to describe it, she likened it to such a voice as she would imagine coming from a statue. Next morning his door remained still locked. It was no unusual thing for him to work all night and far into the next day, so no one thought to be surprised. When, however, evening came, and yet he did not appear, his servants gathered outside the room and whispered, remembering what had happened once before. They listened, but could hear no sound. They shook the door and called to him, then beat with their fists upon the wooden panels, but still no sound came from the room. Becoming alarmed, they decided to burst open the door, and, after many blows, it gave way and they crowded in. He sat bolt upright in his high-backed chair. They thought at first he had died in his sleep, but when they drew nearer and the light fell upon him, they saw the livid marks of bony fingers round his throat, and in his eyes there was a terror such as is not often seen in human eyes. Feeding Time by James Gunn. Angela woke up with a sickening realization that today was feeding time. She slipped out of bed, hurried to the desk, and leafed nervously through her appointment book. She sighed with relief. It was all right. Today was her appointment. Angela took only 45 minutes to put on her makeup and dress. It was feeding time. As she descended in the elevator, walked swiftly through the lobby, and got into a taxi, she didn't even notice the eyes that stopped and swiveled after her. Feeding time. Angela was haunted by a zoo. She was also haunted by men, but this was understandable. She was the kind of blonde, blue-eyed angel men pray to, or for, and she had the kind of measurements, 36, 26, 36, that make men want to take up mathematics. But Angela had no time for men, not today. Angela was haunted by a zoo, and it was feeding time. Dr. Bachman had a gray-bearded, pink-skinned, blue-eyed kindliness that was his greatest stock in trade. Underneath, there was something else not quite so kindly which had been influential in his choice of professions. Now, for a moment, his professional mask, his persona, as the Jungians called it, slipped aside. A zoo, he repeated, his voice clear, deep, and cultured, with just a trace of accent, Viennese without a doubt. He caught himself quickly. A zoo, exactly. Well, not exactly a zoo, said Angela, pursing her red lips thoughtfully at the ceiling. At least not an ordinary zoo. It's really only one animal, if you could call him an animal. What do you call him? Oh, I never call him, Angela said quickly, giving a delicious little shiver. He might come. Dr. Bachman naturally. But you don't mean that, Angela said softly. You mean if he isn't an animal, what is he? What he is a monster. What kind of monster? Dr. Bachman asked calmly. Angela turned on one elbow and looked over the back of the couch at the psychoanalyst. You say that as if you've met monsters every day, but then I guess you do. She sighed sympathetically. It is a dangerous business being a psychiatrist. Dangerous, Dr. Bachman repeated querulously, caught off guard for a second time. What do you mean? Oh, the people you meet, all the strange ones and their problems. Yes, of course, he said hurriedly. But about the monster. Yes, doctor, Angela said in her obedient tone, and composed herself again on the couch. She looked at the corner of the ceiling as if she could see him clinging there. He's not a nightmare monster, though he's frightening enough. He's too real. There are no blurred edges. He has purple fur, short, rather like the fur on some spiders, and 4 legs not evenly distributed like a dog's or a cat's, but grouped together at the bottom. They're very strong, much stronger than they need to be. He can jump 15 feet straight up into the air. She turned again to look at Dr. Bachman. Are you getting all this? Hastily, the psychoanalyst turned his notebook away, but Angela had caught a glimpse of his doodling. Goody, she said, clapping her hands in delight. You're drawing a picture. Yes, he said grumpily. Go on. Well, he has only 2 arms. He has 6 fingers on each hand, and they're flexible as if they had no bones in them. They're elastic, too. They can stretch way out, as if to pick fruit that grows on a very tall vine. A vegetarian, said Dr. Bachman, making a small joke. Oh no, doctor, Angela said, her eyes wide. He eats everything, but meat is what he likes the best. His face is almost human except it's green. He has very sharp teeth, she shuddered. Very sharp. Am I going too fast? Don't worry about me, snapped the psychoanalyst. It is your subconscious we are exploring, and it must go on at its own speed. Oh dear, Angela said with resignation. The subconscious. It's going to be another one of those. You don't believe this nightmare has any objective reality? Dr. Bachman asked sharply. That would make me insane, wouldn't it? Well, I guess there's no hope for it. That's what I think. Dr. Bachman tugged thoughtfully at his beard. I see. Let's go back. How did this illusion begin? I think it began with the claustrophobia. Dr. Bachman shrugged. A morbid fear of confined places is not unusual. It is when you are out in the open air. The fear had no relationship to my surroundings. All of a sudden, I'd feel like I was in a fairly large room, which had a tremendous weight of rock or masonry above it. I was in the midst of a crowd of people. For moments, it became so real that my actual surroundings faded out. But the feeling came and went. Yes, then came the smell. It was a distinctive odor, musty and strong like the lion house in the winter, only wrong, somehow. But it made me think of the zoo. Naturally, you were the only one who smelled it. That's right. I was self-conscious at first. I tried to drown out the odor with perfume, but that didn't help. Then I realized that no one else seemed to smell it. Like the claustrophobia, it came and went, but each time it returned, it was stronger. Finally, I went to a psychiatrist, a Dr. Aber. That was before the illusion became visual. That was sort of Dr. Aber's fault. My seeing the monster, I mean. It is to be expected. When nothing else worked, Dr. Aber tried hypnosis. Reach into your subconscious, he said. Open the door to the past. While I reached out, I opened the door, and that's when it happened. What happened? Dr. Bachman leaned forward. I saw the monster. Oh, he leaned back again, disappointed. People were close, but the monster was closer. The odor was stifling as he stared through the door and saw me. I slammed the door shut, but it was too late. The door was there. I knew it could be opened, and he knew it could be opened. Now I was really afraid. Afraid that the monster might get through the door. The psychoanalyst tugged at his beard. You have an explanation for this illusion. You won't laugh? Certainly not. I think there's some strange accident of time. I've become linked to a zoo that will exist in the distant future. The monster wasn't born on Earth. He's an alien. From Jupiter, perhaps, although I don't think so. Through the door, I can see part of a sign. I can read this much. Angela turned and took the notebook from his surprised fingers and printed quickly. M''BA, Larmus native Vega. Just like in the zoo, she said, handing the book back. There's a star named Vega. Yes, said the psychoanalyst heavily. And you are afraid that this alien will get through the door and... That's it. He can open it now, you see. He can't exist here. That would be impossible. But something from the present can exist in the future. And the monster gets hungry for meat. For meat? Dr. Bachman repeated, frowning. Every few weeks, Angela said, shivering. It's feeding time. Dr. Bachman tugged at his beard, preparing the swift feline stroke which would lay bare the traumatic relationship at the root of the neurosis. He said incisively, the monster resembles your father, is that not so? It was Angela's turn to frown. And that's what Dr. Aber said. I'd never have noticed it on my own. There might be a slight resemblance. This Dr. Aber, he did you no good. Oh, I wouldn't want you to think that, Angela protested quickly. He helped, but the help was temporary, if you know what I mean. And you would like something more permanent. That would be nice, Angela admitted, but I'm afraid it's too much to hope for. No, it will take time, but eventually we will work these subconscious repressions into your conscious mind, where they will be cleansed of their neurotic value. You think it's all in my head, Angela said wistfully. Certainly, the psychoanalyst said briskly. Let us go over the progress of the illusion once more. First came the claustrophobia, then the smell, then, through Dr. Aber's bung treatment, I should say, the dreams. Oh, not dreams, Doctor, Angela corrected. When I sleep, I don't dream of monsters. I dream, she blushed prettily, of men. The thing in the zoo. I can see him whenever I close my eyes. She shivered. He is getting impatient. Hungry? Angela beamed at him. Yes, it's almost feeding time. He gets fed, of course, by the keeper, I suppose. But that's just grains and fruits and things like that. And he gets hungry for meat. And then he opens the door. And I suppose he sticks his elastic fingers through the door. Angela gave him a look of pure gratitude. That's right. And you're afraid that one day he will get hungry enough to eat you. That's it, I guess. Wouldn't you be? Afraid, that is. There's all the legends about dragons and minotaurs and creatures like that. They always preferred a diet of young virgins, and where there's all that talk. If that were your only concern, Dr. Bachman commented dryly, it seems to me that you could make yourself ineligible with no great difficulty. Angela giggled. Why, Doctor, what a suggestion. So, to return, every few weeks comes feeding time, and you, feeling nervous and afraid, come to me for help. You put it so well. And now it's feeding time. That's right. Angela's nostrils dilated suddenly. He's getting close to the door. Don't you smell him, Doctor? Dr. Bachman sniffed once and snorted. Certainly not. Now tell me about your father. Well, Angela began reluctantly, he believed in reincarnation. No, the psychoanalyst said impatiently. The important things. How you felt about him when you were a little girl. What he said to you. How you hated your mother. I'm afraid there won't be time. He's got one of his hands on the door already. Despite himself, Dr. Bachman glanced over his shoulder. The monster? His beard twitched nervously. Nonsense. About your father. The door's opened, Angela cried out. I'm scared, Doctor. It's feeding time. I won't be tricked again, the psychoanalyst said sternly. If we're to get anywhere with this analysis, I must have complete... Doctor, watch out. The fingers. Dr. Bachman. Doctor. Angela sighed. It was a strange sigh, half hopelessness and half relief. She picked up her purse. Doctor, she said tentatively to the empty room. She stood up, sniffing the air gingerly. The odor was gone. So was Dr. Bachman. She walked toward the door. Doctor, she tried once more. There was no answer. There never had been an answer, not from 17 psychiatrists, Aber through Bachman. There was no doubt about it. The monster did like psychiatrists. It was a truly terrifying situation she was in, certainly through no fault of her own, and a girl had to do the best she could. She could console herself with the thought that the monster would never take her for food. She was the trapdoor it needed into this world. Eat her, and feeding time was over. She was perfectly safe as long as she didn't run out of psychiatrists. Alright, so those are the only two that I've got time for. A little bit interesting reading these older stories. Some, ideas and language is pretty outdated, but they're still interesting. Anyway, as always, thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you'll join me for the next one. And until then, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night.